Hi, everybody. That was a very kind way of saying that don't let the bald head fool you. I'm the baby in the crowd when it comes to arts institutions. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. One of the things that Larry touched on happens to be a sore point often in our relationship as a museum with our customers. Our mission, and that's where I want to start, is to be the premier experience and the best resource for inspiration and information about African American Marylanders. And I say that because that's really the focus around which we base our decisions about our collections, our decisions about our accessioning process, all of it. And as Larry indicated, so often we wind up hurting people's feelings unintentionally, getting a black eye unintentionally because we're picky. But I think you can understand why. We're not primarily an art institution, although I'll talk about that in a minute. Art is extremely important to our collection. We are primarily an institution of history and culture. And so when people come to offer us art and artifacts, that poses a challenge for us, and we go right to our mission. First of all, is what you want to give us primarily something about Maryland, Maryland history, Maryland culture. Because if you can imagine this, we get at least one offer a week or one inquiry a week about someone making a donation of an artifact or a piece of art. That would fill up our space fairly quickly if we accepted everything. We are the largest African American museum on the East Coast. We are the second largest in the nation, and I'm getting this boast up because once the National Museum is up, I've got to zip the lip. We're 82,000 square feet. That will be over 700,000 square feet. It'll be a magnificent structure. But it won't eclipse us because of the focus of the mission. So we have some space in collections, and this is a problem for every museum. We don't have enough space for everything that people would offer. And then we really look for weird things in most people's estimation. For instance, one of the things that we collected in the artifact area several years ago before we opened the museum, and I'm going to use this as an example of how you have to make your decisions judiciously. We knew that in one of the theme areas of the museum, Things Hold, Lines Connect, how our community of African Americans was formed in Maryland, we knew that we would show some very ordinary parts of our culture. The barber shop, the church. And so for the barber shop area, we accepted a barber's chair. You've never seen it, have you? And the reason is, when the actual exhibit area went up, we realized that to tell the Maryland story the way we were telling it, we had to shrink the amount of space we were using for things. And so the small area that shows a barber shop would be absolutely outsized by a full, real barber chair. And there's a second reason. Larry also pointed to this. When a museum accepts something, it accepts the responsibility for keeping it in absolutely good condition. That means that our exhibition areas have separate heating and humidity control systems. We are bound by a compact with our fellow institutions, for instance, like the BMA. If we were to borrow something from them, they want to know that we are going to keep it in the best possible condition. And so we have to really maintain and monitor the controls over all those systems, because anything that happens to something really is our fault, and nobody would want to lend us anything else. Well, the barber chair is made of leather. And so, as you know, keeping the leather in the state that it was given to us becomes a special problem. We have a special area in the museum where we keep things that we don't know what we're going to do with. And they're right on the first floor. Guess what's in there? The barber's chair. And we have to keep it in this absolutely perfect condition as long as we keep it. And the whole business with the leather is a problem. There are other things. We got a hat from Victorine Adams, who's a woman of great repute locally, because her husband and her own work, her civic work, starting a store, the first women's store where you could actually go in and try clothing on and all of that, and then moving into the legislature. We have a hat from Victorine Adams. On the day that we were preparing it, and this was way before I got to the museum, to put into the exhibition, a bug crawled out of something. So guess where it went? Into a freezer immediately. Because we cannot put anything into the exhibition that might contaminate in any other way something else. So those are just a few of the problems. So when people come to us, we go first of all immediately to the mission. Is what you're offering us going to fit into the mission? Is it mostly about Maryland, or does it have a connection to Maryland? If it's, and even with art, that would be a primary consideration. Was this a Maryland artist? Is it Holston, for instance, or someone that we would want to be honored because we're showing the strength of the mind, one of our themes in the permanent collection, and you're showing the great intellectual talent and artistry of Marylanders. So those people would take a primary place, although I would never refuse a beard.
Neither would I.
No, I didn't. But those are the kinds of first questions we ask. Now, because we're in this wonderful gallery and had high tea with Myrtis, I want to talk about the role of art because, as I said, it does play a prominent place, I think, in our history museum. I think it's important because it often freezes for us how we see or saw ourselves at a particular time and under particular conditions. The artist is expressing that in that whole nonverbal way that communicates a message so much more fully and yet more deeply than verbal communication can do. I think it also shows what influences were present at the time that that work of art took place. And if you look across the history of African American art, you can see the difference between what Tanner or Woodruff were doing and what's going on, for instance, in contemporary art. Even the expression, they were trying to show that they had mastered the skills, the classical skills of being able to reproduce something. We just unveiled about a month ago a very important acquisition, and it was a Woodruff, that showed Dr. Pickens, who was the first African American Dean of Students at Morgan, and he had a very, very special history even in addition to that. This painting of Dr. Pickens by Woodruff I think was done because he was such an exceptional man. He did not get to have an education and begin to have one until he was 11 years old. But by his 20s, his early 20s, he was graduating from Harvard. He became renowned as an orator throughout the country and was making appearances all across the country with great people, Booker T, so many others. So we really prized that particular acquisition. We actually took down the Woodruff that we had hanging on in that area and actually placed it in the Strength of the Mind area near, of course, the Morgan artifacts that we have. So you can see how a piece of art become an artifact is very, very valuable to us. So what's our accessioning process? We follow, I don't think ours is quite as stringent, but we're trying to develop it more and more. But we follow a pretty set series of guidelines. I've brought for you 2 forms. And one is if you're going to offer an artifact, one if you're going to offer a work of art. But it's a 3-tiered process, and the first tier starts with those forms. They ask a lot of questions. You might think they're picky, but they are that way for a reason. We want to know that you really have the ability to offer us what you are offering, that you can prove that you own it, that the person who's offering it is competent legally, in the legal sense of the term, to offer it, that if it's come from another country, it didn't come in because someone stuck it in their purse or in a bag, so that it's legally here and therefore it can legally be given and we don't have to have a repatriation problem down the road. So all those things, the form is going to ask you several questions. And it's not, because we're just trying to be nosy, it's because we really need to know that once it's given, it really would be ours, clear and wholly, to be able to use for the betterment of the museum. So forms is the first tier. Those forms are reviewed, and it may take as much as a month. I've got an extremely small staff. Each person wears maybe 3 hats. So it will take the review of that, and on our staff it's Christina Batips who does it. The second tier of that process would be the review by our fantastic curator, Dr. Michelle Wilkinson. And she would, again, go through all the things I've talked about, asking the questions about the mission and the pertinence of it. And then, if it passes that muster with her, she informs me, and I agree with her. I never disagree with her. And then the third tier would be approval for everything under $100,000 by the collections committee. And that's the same as your at sessions. And that committee meets twice a year. So you can see that the process is not going to be as rapid as you might wish it would be, because from the 30-day to respond to your form to the time when the curator gets to review it while she's setting up exhibitions 2 years ahead and all of that, to the time that the committee meets twice a year, maybe close to a year may pass. Sometimes and often we will accept something before the whole process is complete when we feel really sure that it's not going to have a problem going through. And then for works over $100,000, there must be board approval from our board. So that's our basic process. I wanted to close by also, since we're very new, just saying 1 or 2 things to you. I believe that you're going to hear more and more about our museum because we are fired up and ready to go, like the president. Okay. And I brought with me a few copies. Actually, we're down to the last 4 events for June, but they are for 4 very big events. And I'll just point out 2 of them. For instance, tomorrow we'll be showing a film, which we do on some Sundays at 2 p.m. And this one is the one people call the Black Woodstock. And we'll have Isaac Hayes doing the stuff from Shaft and everything. So people often enjoy that. On the 23rd of this month, we'll be opening our new temporary exhibition. So we always complement our permanent exhibition with the temporary one, which very often sort of brings the history into contemporary or modern times. This one is going to be called Growing Up Afro. And it's a collaboration with the Afro newspaper about what it was like to grow up African American, along with the newspaper, Growing Up Afro in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So you'll see Elijah Cummings when he was a newspaper boy. We have over 160 photographs. I think it's going to be a big hit. I think it's got the kind of heart value and the local value. We're going to keep it for many, many months, so don't miss that one. And because we are new, and trying to grow. I always tell people a family that's not growing is what? Dying. So think about us and think about joining the family and becoming a member. We would love to have you. And therefore I brought some membership forms as well if you'd like to. All right. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to be a part of the family.